All right, folks. Well, it's the fourth Saturday of the month, so it's time for the Learn Pro Poker study group here at Rec Poker. Um, Learn Pro Poker was our first real learning partner, and they've been a fantastic friend of the organization. We love being affiliated with them, and every month we get to share up to a 1 hour training video with our premium members that's taken from behind the paywall of the Learn Pro Poker training site. So this is just a fantastic way to, along with all of our other learning with partners, partners and programs, you get a sense of what are all the other training sites like? How do they like to work? What kind of videos do they make? What's the best way to learn with them? Because it's really all about finding the right fit when it comes to thinking about coaching or training. You want to be lining up with people that are going to be thinking about poker the way you want to think about poker and thinking about learning and teaching the way that is effective for you. So that's why we love having so many different partners here at Rec Poker. But LPP was kind of the OG for us, and so it's always great to be talking about their subject material in this monthly study group. So one of the video types at Learn Pro Poker are these hand history reviews with Ryan LaPlante. So Ryan goes through his own hand histories or other players' hand histories, and just goes, hand by hand, street by street through the action, talking about his decision-making process. This is one called Bracelet Hunting, where we're looking at a $7,777 WSOP online event that Ryan ended up doing pretty well in. Took home about $120,000. And this is a multi-video series. We're looking at part 2, which picks up the action, taking it from about the middle stage of the tournament up to the point where the bubble bursts. So there's a few different areas that come up for conversation in this video. He talks a lot about, well, not a lot, he talks about the flat payout structure, how that affects things like ICM and deal making. We see some interesting spots where he talks about the difference between jamming and inducing jams from other players depending on stack sizes. He talks about deviating from solver and GTO play. We look at Range Trainer Pro's features to compare a lot of different spots like that. Yeah, there's a few other kind of particular things that come up around like check raise sizing. It talks about one street versus multi-street value hands, a lot of flop analysis. And one of the things that I want to talk about today, this notion of shoving, but not quite shoving, and kind of leaving yourself a few chips back so that you're not eliminated necessarily if you lose the hand. So, Dave, you said that you'd had a chance to watch the video. First of all, what are your general thoughts on this kind of video series, the hand history review series? Is this a way that is helpful for you when you're studying?
Yeah, I should do it more, but I do kind of like these ones. Like they're very situational. You see someone's thoughts during the. I mean, it's not during, but it's giving you what he's thinking of at various stages of this tournament and on specific hands. It was very useful.
Mm-hmm.
It brought up sort of a couple of maybe I'll think of exactly what I mean in the way as we go forward, but it brought up a couple of points in tournaments that are sticklers for me sometimes, or issues for me. Like at what point does he, he starts getting down to 20 or 30 blinds in this section of the video. There's a couple of spots where he was shoving or considering shoving that I know I should do, but I'm always reluctant to when I get into those situations. That I tend to be a little too timid with it at times. So it's helpful to sort of see issues you deal with and how somebody that's more experienced actually deals with it.
When those kind of hands that you're talking about, those shoving spots, Are you usually less inclined to do it just because of the absolute strength of the hand, like just because it's a weak enough hand that you're worried that if you get called, you're going to be behind?
Probably to That's probably a good chunk of it. It's like, I still have 30 blinds or 28 blinds or whatever, and something better is going to come up, but, but that's maybe not the right way to go all the time.
Yeah,
Sometimes it is,
I
sometimes
did
it isn't.
I did see a couple spots where he's like shit, like there's an open, a 2x open and then a call, and he's pretty free to get in like 30 big blinds
Yeah,
as the squeeze
stuff
there.
like king queen or stuff like.
Yeah, there was the king queen spot, which was interesting too, because it there's within one orbit, he's in late position and he turns down the chance to open raise with ace nine offsuit. And then the next orbit on the same table with the same players, he opens king queen offsuit instead. And he
And
talks
it's much
about how,
better and much more,
yeah, it's like a much better hand
much
and like
easier
it's
to
an
play.
obvious, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't quite
Um,
understand that completely, but I sort of got it.
I think I get the sense that like king queen offsuit is a second best hand only really against like ace king or ace queen, whereas ace nine is a second best hand against ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10. Like it's gonna be a loser. Like, I don't know. Rob, Keith, Dave, what I kind of struggle with this a bit sometimes, because like all the non-premium hands are going to be second best sometimes. I feel like the difficult part is playing them post flop.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with ace nine, all the ace six, seven, eight, nine, all of those, none of them can make a straight.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you get top pair, top kicker, how 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 good are you really feeling? Because any 10, jack, queen, king is going to ruin your hand. So whereas if you have king, queen, you can feel pretty good about it because you're going to have a good feel whether the players you're playing against have a premium hand. Is ace king, ace queen in play here when you hit
Mm-hmm.
that top pair? So and plus you can make up straight with king queen. So yeah, it's a straighter, as Tommy Angelo would say.
Yeah.
So I think that's where that comes from. I think if you look at if you look at range charts, you'll see a lot of gaps in the unsuited aces between ace six and ace nine.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually not as much action there. You'll see some action with the ace four, ace five, and then a lot of action with the ace 10 up, but you won't see a lot of action in different spots on your range charts with those unsuited middling aces. They just get you in so much trouble.
Yeah. Well, and I like your
And
point about, no, please continue.
one other thing I was going to mention to Dave about the reluctance to get it all in certain spots might have a little to do also with the types of players that you're playing against compared to the types of players that Ryan is playing against.
Mm.
I think the types of players that we're playing against, whether it's in the home game or some small, $10 tournament, they're going to be a lot less risk averse than somebody playing in a $7,000 online tournament. So I think you're going to get called by of a lot of hands that in the $7,000 tournament would have folded because those people are aware of just how strong they need to be to call in those spots. Whereas some of the competition we're against, they don't. They just say they see a couple of pretty cards and say, okay, let's go.
Yeah, I think it's true.
I mean, I think that's what mostly he was talking about, playability of the hand in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Queen, it's the same thing what Rob was saying, basically. I think Ryan basically said the similar thing, that King Queen was much more playable than the Ace Nine for the reasons that Rob was saying, I guess. There was something else he said about a King Queen, but I don't know if it was a different hand or not.
It was in the big blind, and someone had opened in middle position. I was thinking about that too, there, Dave. and
Talk
he
about-
says like he feels like the EV of a jam is roughly equivalent to the EV of calling there, of just defending there. And so he says in a tournament like this, if they're close, he's going to err on defending, which I thought was interesting as well, because I I think of King Queen off as being just like a really good 3-bet candidate, because it blocks a lot of our opponents' premium hands, and the hands that are dominated by it tend to be 4-betting hands. So if your opponent has queens or kings or aces or ace king, typically if you 3-bet them, they're going to 4-bet those hands, sometimes ace queen. And so if you do 3-bet with it and get called, then I think the calling range of our opponents is pretty solidly behind our hand at king queen, because most of the hands that have us dominated would be 4-betting there. So I kind of like it for the same reason I kind of like king jack offsuit. Those kind of hands I feel like make good balancing 3-bet, and they just don't play that well out of position, particularly the offsuit varieties. But I understand once you, yeah, Dave.
Sorry,
No, please
finish your thought. I was just
I was gonna say, once you get into these ranges that the pros play, it's just too strong a hand to not defend, I think is what he's saying. Like he doesn't want to throw away the equity by 3-betting with it.
I think that was the hand that he was talking about, wanting that queen king, the good hand that with the high cards in his range to offset the
Yeah, to
he
protect
wants to
his,
call with the small pairs and stuff.
yeah, that's right. That's right. He did say that. That was another thing he said that was nice about calling with it, was that it strengthened his calling range.
Yeah,
Which again is really only something you have to worry about if you're playing against people that are paying attention to your actual ranges and the extremities of your ranges. Like, I don't know how important that is in the games that we're playing necessarily. Do you guys think about that at all when in the games that we're playing? Do you think about like, I should get this to showdown so that people know that I have this in this part of my range?
No,
occasionally, not very often.
no, I don't think they're paying that close of attention.
Right. And when they're not paying attention, it's like fancy play syndrome, I think. We start prioritizing the wrong elements of the hand, and like prioritizing things like disguise and board coverage and balance, when those aren't really that helpful against these opponents.
I think if you're playing a pretty a good balanced strategy with a good starting range, if your starting ranges are good and you're playing a relatively good strategy based on what we talk about for c-betting frequencies and c-betting bet sizes and all of those other things, you're automatically going to be balanced. So I don't know that you have to worry about it as much, because the underlying strategies that you're using to make your decisions street by street should end up giving you that balance anyway. So
Yeah.
you don't actually have to think about that as much as you just think about the strategies that you use on each street.
Yeah, and that just goes to show how important pre-flop ranges are, because of that knock-on effect. If you start losing discipline pre-flop and playing a bunch of hands that you shouldn't be playing, a gym, then you end up being too heavily weighted towards garbage hands post-flop, and now you're already unbalanced. All those garbage hands have to go somewhere. So yeah, it's really, really important.
There was another, I don't remember the exact spot now. There was another hand where he had middle pair with like ace 9 maybe.
Yeah, it was ace 9 on jack 9-6 rainbow. I remember that one too.
And he talked about and maybe I got the hand mixed up, but he talked about the difference between having the ace, but that like the big kicker with the middle pair versus having another card that sort of connects with the board, like a 9-7 or something, or
Oh, are you thinking about the hand where he made trips?
yeah,
with
maybe it's a different hand.
It
Maybe
was
that's
ace
the hand.
8.
Maybe it was the
Yeah,
ace
he
eight
had.
hand where he talked about the ace being a kind of a blocker to the other guy having the really big hands, and how we rather, oh, what was it now? I getting, was
No,
he
I
gonna
remember. I remember.
call with
So
this, or he might have raised with the worst ace, or
so it's a
eight?
hand where he's got ace eight, and he makes second pair on the flop and calls a c bet, and then I think it goes check check on the turn, and then he rivers a third ace, so he trips a third eight, he trips eights, and in Range Trainer Pro, it shows leading with king eight, queen eight, jack eight, 10-8, 9-8, but checking with ace eight,
Right.
because it blocks the kind of hands that you want our opponent to have that can call the bet. Hands like overpairs, hands like top pair, top kicker, other hands that the opponent's going to feel strongly enough about to call. And having that ace in your hand blocks those. So he plays them as a check to
Or the two
strengthen his
big
checking
cards.
range, and to hopefully induce a raise from his opponent.
Right. Yeah.
Or a bet, rather, to induce a bet
I
from his
thought that
opponent.
was a good hand to look at. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other one of those that was interesting was that ace nine hand on Jack 9-6 Rainbow, where he flops second pair top kicker. There's not a lot of good cards for him on future streets either when you've got ace nine on Jack 9-6. He talks about how a lot of people kind of think of it as being a one street hand, but it's actually a relatively strong hand compared to other hands that you're going to have in your range at this point, and opts to go for a larger sizing there as an exploit, which makes a lot of sense.
So he was the pre-flop aggressor,
Yes.
and was it a blind call?
Yes.
Big blind call? Okay. So he went with a bigger sizing then on his C bet
Mm-hmm.
than you normally would with that kind of a flop, because that middling kind of a flop like that is typically more a big blind type flop. So you might not bet as frequently and not bet as big. So you probably bet a quarter to a third pot, maybe 50 to 60% of the time, for instance. But he, as an exploit, because he had second pair with top kicker, he chose to bet bigger.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
That's
one of the
interesting.
comments was to influence the sizing of the three bet.
Oh yeah, he wanted to make, so part of it. That's a great point, Dave. Yeah, Rob. He was saying that a bigger c bet strengthens his opponent's check raising range enough that then he can comfortably fold to a check raise, because his opponent would check raise at a higher frequency versus a smaller c bet sizing. So that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, good call, Dave.
That's something that we're talking about for our next Wrecking Crew thing.
Oh yeah, right. I saw that.
And I've been playing around with that already with early position against a big blind. And check raising is what we're keying on, right?
Nice. Well, check raising is a really underutilized branch of the decision tree for recreational players. We just don't really know what hands to check raise with, or to what size, or what boards, and it's a really powerful tool.
And most recreational players feel comfortable check raising two pair or trips or sets. You know, those are easy. You flop a straight, okay, let's check raise. But there's so many other places where you can use that check raise based on the board texture and the supposed range of the pre-flop aggressor. And that's where recreational players should work a little bit more on looking at the different types of flop textures that totally miss the pre-flop aggressor. And the pre-flop aggressor, just because he is, I mean, they tend to c-bet more than they should. There's a frequency issue with most players when it comes to c-betting. They just figure they can c-bet no matter what, and people will play fit or fold. So there's a good opportunity to attack that type of player.
So Rob, when you're looking at those spots, what I mean, so does it kind of break down into three camps? So there's value check raises, which I think recreational players understand pretty well, two pairs and sets, basically, let's say. And then there are I kind of think of it as two other kinds of check raises. There's board cover check raises, which don't have so much to do with your actual holdings, but mostly have to do with the board texture. And then there's holding related bluffs, things that have like blockers to the nuts or a lot of equity, very, very strong draws and that kind of thing.
Right.
And I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think the next thing that recreational players get comfortable with are these very strong draws, because they have a lot of equity. They're not even really bluffs. If you think about it, they're not really bluffs. Like if the board comes queen, there's a hand in here where the board comes queen 7-5, 2 diamonds. And if you've got ace queen and I've got the 6-8 of diamonds, I am crushing you in equity. It's crazy. It's not even close. It's like 58-42 or something like that. So those aren't bluffs. If you're check raising, up and down in the flush draw, that's actually a value check raise, even though you don't have a made hand. So you're talking. Sorry, Dave.
There was one of those hands in the video, right? Where
that's what made me. I had to pull up Equilab and just crack it for a second. I was like,
the other guy had the straight and flush draw, and Ryan held up.
Yeah, but he came in a dog.
Yeah.
So Rob, I think you're mostly talking about these board texture check raises where it's just not as likely that our opponent's range intersects with a very high value hand. Is that right?
Yeah, and the propensity of the pre-flop aggressor to c-bet too frequently. Right. And to the wrong sizing. I mean, we looked at, when Chris did his thing on c-bet sizing, there's a lot of boards that even us, as we went through them, looked at it and said, well, not that's a small sizing. And then really what it is, it's more of a big sizing. So there's places where people should be using big sizing, they're using small sizing, and they're doing it too much. So against a small size, it's a lot easier to check raise. Against a bigger size, it's a little more difficult to check raise. And that's where Ryan was talking about on the one hand where he overbet, he bet bigger with the ace-9.
Yeah.
Because then the only check raises he was going to see are going to be very strong hands. Whereas if he bets small, he could get check raised with a lot of weaker holdings just because he bet smaller and probably betting too much.
And that makes sense why I chose a board like Jack 9-6 Rainbow for that, because there are a couple straight draws, but they're mostly like gut shot straight draws unless they have exactly 7-8 and no flush draws. So there aren't as many kind of natural semi-bluff candidates to be check raising with. So once you eliminate those, then people have to either be check raising with those very strong hands, which we are crushed by with ace-9, or with some weird airball bluffs. So Rob, that's the thing that I'm kind of interested in, because I still have trouble choosing which hands to check raise on those boards that belong to me as the big blind caller. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right? In the analysis for the Wrecking Crew study group.
Yeah, we're I've only started it, so the only board I'm looking at so far is like a 3 Broadway, an ace high with 2 other Broadway cards, which it's very, you're very, very polarized there. and mostly check raising with strong hands.
Hmm.
You know, you're mostly check raising with 2 pairs and big flush draws. The as we get in, as I start breaking it down into some of the other board textures, I'm sure we're going to see a lot of more wide open type of check raising opportunities than I've looked at so far, because I've just started.
Yeah.
So, but
And
it's
most of
interesting.
those, no, please.
We were talking in the Poker Brain. One of the things that Matt was talking about in there was what I just mentioned about people c-betting too much
Hmm.
and c-betting at the wrong sizes. So when you see somebody at your table, you're playing, you know, some live tournament, and you see this person raising and automatically c-betting any flop. You c-betting all the time. That's the kind of guy that if you're defending in the big blind, that you can take advantage of by a check raise.
Hmm. And most of those spots are at like a typical stack depth, like a playing stack depth. That's before you start getting too short, and you know, that
Yeah,
can start
probably
adjusting.
40 and more. You could also
Mhm.
do it a little bit at 30, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
But when you get down into the 20 area, then it gets a little bit stickier.
Yeah, yeah, you don't have as much fold equity, um, and you can't make as much on the hands either. So there's not as much of an incentive. So that was interesting. So there was a couple spots in Ryan's video where he's getting pretty short stacked, but he still covers a few players in the tournament. And at this point, they're getting close to the bubble. Dave, did you have something there?
No, sorry.
No, good. Stay unmuted. I like it when you jump in. The I think he's down to like 10 or 11 big blinds or something like that. Someone opens in late position, and he calls with king 5 suited. He just defends as the last player to act, closing the action. And he talks about how he's going to either jam or check jam on certain flops. And the flop doesn't come for him. It's like queen 9-3 with 1 club or something. So he just checks and folds. But Taylor Moss has talks about this. I've seen him do this live as well. You know, I think some of us, we kind of get a little too selective about the hand strength once we are closing the action and getting short stacked. I think we kind of like, oh no, I'm getting short stacked, I got to wait for a really good hand to play. But he's clearly, once the SPR kind of gets that low, he wasn't that close to the bubble, so it wasn't like he was getting squeezed by ICM, which I think is what was part of his thinking. But he's not afraid to risk his tournament life if he gets like a strong draw or something like that, which was interesting. At a couple orbits later, as we're getting closer to the money, he's sitting on the big blind with 9-7 suited, and he's got a slightly bigger stack. I think he says he covers about 10 players in the tournament at that point, and there's something like 2 players from the money. And he talks about how big a mistake it would be to defend at that point. And the factors seem to be, you're closer to the money, so there's more of an incentive just to fold your way through. And actually, you have a bigger stack. That means that you kind of have more to lose, and that's part of why it would be such a big mistake. In the hand earlier, even though he's in a kind of a similar situation, his stack is smaller, he hasn't doubled up yet, and so he's more willing to put it in with king 5 suited. So it really, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think he was actually not covering too many people at that point in the hand. With the king, was it the king 5 hand?
With the king 5, he
Or
wasn't. No,
or
he was
like
very
38
low.
39th out of 39. With
Yeah,
36 people cashing or something like that.
yeah. So he was willing to
Give it a shot.
he give it a shot. Yeah, exactly, because he didn't have as much to lose being the shorter stack already.
But then once he covered 6 or 7 people, it was a different story.
Yeah, and he didn't even want to play the hand. like I think he said that like 7-9 9-7 suited is a pretty hand to me. Like I know exactly how to not play 9-7 suited post flop. It's either gonna make a very strong draw or 2-pair or better, or I'm just gonna fold. I'm not getting in trouble making a 1-pair on like, king 9-4. I'm not going to the mattresses with 9-7 suited on that. I'm not there to make 1-pair. But he was pretty clear, like he didn't even want to play the hand. He was like, nope, we're just gonna take the spot. We're just gonna fold here because playing it at all is an issue. When we've got enough chips just to get through the bubble anyway.
Yeah, he's better than me at folding 4s and stuff like that around there too.
I saw that too. Yeah. So there's another spot where someone opens an early position. He's got 4s and he just insta folds them. I guess there were enough short stacks at the table that I guess he felt like he was going to get shoved behind at a high enough frequency that it wasn't profitable, and he probably didn't feel like he had the implied odds to have it pay off if he does flop the set. But I admit I am also a little sticky with those every pocket pair. I like making sets. I like flopping sets. It's a fun way to play poker. I don't know how profitable it is. I know I'm probably giving up an edge. But if I'm getting the odds, I'm usually calling with my baby pairs just because I'm a recreational player and I like making sets. What about you, Keith?
Did Ryan mention, did he use the term bubble factor or risk premium or any of those terms?
He didn't use those
books we look
terms.
at?
He didn't use those terms, but he talked about the concepts
Yeah.
generally as he was talking about like being close to the bubble. But
Because
yeah, he
with that
didn't use that term.
9-7 hand, it sounded like he had a big bubble factor and he needed to have a powerhouse to even play it.
Yep. I think that's the right way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And Rob, you did such a great job breaking down those, because those calculations are actually relatively simple once you learn how to apply them. I mean, you're probably still not doing them live at the table, but
Oh, you can't. There's no way you can. Because really the bubble factor depends on understanding what your equity is in that stage of the tournament. And if there's 36 people left, I mean, you can get maybe a vague idea of what what everybody's equity is, but it really is dependent on the size of the chips, the chip stack that everybody has, and then what the payout structure is. So that's where bubble factor comes into play if you're using it off the table to really understand all those different situations that you might find yourself in. You're never going to be able to do it at the table. So the idea is to understand that there is a bubble factor and what kind of impact it is based on the type of structure of the tournament you're in and what your chip stack is compared to everybody else, and what your position is against people that cover you and people that don't.
Yeah, the way you study it is just with an app like ICMizer or HRC, and just keep looking at spots. That's, do a line checks on yourself, keep looking at spots, and eventually you get sort of a feel enough where you can kind of get yourself in the ballpark with it. No way can you come up with anything near exact, but if you're in the ballpark, that's good enough.
Yeah, that seems to me like the kind of thing that like we talk about different ways of studying and different ways of taking in new material. And I think we were talking about this, I don't remember who it was with, Gareth James, maybe someone relatively recently, the difference between studying and practicing. And like studying is kind of what we're doing now, talking about these concepts and thinking about when we might apply them. And then practicing is more like drills with something like ICMizer or Range Trainer Pro, where you're actually just like reps. You're just putting yourself in that position more and more frequently, giving yourself the mental reps of having to make those decisions. And it's less about like learning something new, and it's more about kind of like fine tuning the application of that kind of stuff. So the bubble factor feels like one of those things where it takes both. You kind of have to learn why it's important. You have to learn the circumstances where it's most relevant, and then you also have to drill, because it's not intuitively obvious how ICM affects some of these decisions while you're there playing them. I mean, that's one of the things that can give us such a huge edge if we're the ones studying ICM and our opponents aren't, right? I mean, it feels like recreational players in particular really don't appreciate how important ICM is in the latter stages of the tournaments. Do you think that's true, guys?
Absolutely. And especially in Satellites Live.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man.
That is low hanging fruit in poker. Let me tell you
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah, live satellites.
Yeah.
And specifically, what kind of mistakes do you think people are making? Is it, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What are the typical biggest mistakes that people are making in those fields?
The two that I see is that somebody with plenty of chips that he can fold to the seats are still playing aggressively. And then the other mistake I see is that, everybody knows to slow down when they're getting short and we're getting close to the seats, but they don't understand just how early you need to do that. And they don't seem to understand how you need to adjust your game plan even in the early part of the tournament. You don't want to be playing implied odds types hands or triple barrel bluffs and things like that. You stay away from high variance spots. And they just don't adjust their game. Even I've just seen like the circuit grinders making those mistakes.
Which is crazy if you think about it. Like that's they should have the edge there.
Yeah. And they're still playing aggressively late. And they, see a guy with twice as many chips as he needs to fold to the seats and he's still playing.
Rob, you've talked before. No, please, yeah, Keith.
Yeah. So and then in the MTTs, a lot of them don't understand it either. It's and well, my last main event, I just had a hole in my knowledge about it where I had to study it later. But a lot of people don't, I had a guy in my table that his stack size, he needed to stop playing. And he didn't.
Right.
Yeah. He could he needed to only be playing premium hands, and he was playing almost everything. If he didn't have a giant stack, he wasn't short stack or he needs a jam. He wanted to sit there and play poker.
Right. Yeah, he wanted to play poker.
Yep. Yeah, he was making mistakes.
Yeah.
He was the one who took me out, by the way.
Oh no. You know what I
Yeah.
was gonna say? The next thing I was gonna say, oh yeah, tell us the hand, tell us the spot.
Yeah, I had a ace 10 offsuit under the gun +1. He was under the gun and he opened, and I didn't take that too seriously because he was playing so much. But we had 5 people left before we hit the bubble, and I had about 11 big blinds, and I jammed, and that was a mistake. And at the time, I thought, this is kind of borderline. Maybe I should take this spot. I had in my mind's eye, I had pictures of ranges where it's the green on that hand is starting to fade out, but no, I did not understand the spot correctly. That was in terms of EV, it was a $5,000 mistake.
Wow, really? Yeah. Just because there's so many ways it can go wrong at that point. Yeah.
Yep. And HRC shows you the number of dollars that you can profit or behind by in the chart. It's just it hammered that home to me. Against a guy with a normal range, it was about an $1,100 mistake, but against that guy, it was a nearly $6,000 mistake.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's actually one thing that I think people also don't understand is how to respond to players like that. Because players that are making these kind of ICM errors, sometimes I think there's this notion of being like, oh, I'm going to rein him in. I'm going to be the guy that like stands up to him or something. And we're only making it worse for ourselves when we do it. Like he's doing one of these things where I hate this. He's making all these ICM errors, but they're errors that can also hurt you if you get involved at the table. It's like having a player who doesn't know how narrowly they're supposed to call. If you're shoving thinking that they're going to fold 95% of the time, their lack of ICM knowledge can actually really bite you in the butt if
Yeah.
they're calling with a non-ICM informed range there.
Yeah,
So
he was calling way too wide, and
right.
against him, it was ace queen was even marginal in that spot.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you don't have as much fold equity as you think
Right.
you do against a typical player.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting thing, because I think this comes up a lot. Like, I struggle with this sometimes because I think to myself, well, if I've got ace queen and he's calling a lot, isn't that the kind of situation I want as a poker player? Like, don't I want to take ace queen against a really wide range? I think that's the cash game player in me that
Yeah.
wants to embrace the small edges. And I still have to fight against it as a tournament player, because the downside is just much greater when it's your tournament life on the line. Do you guys feel this? Like I don't know. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I want my opponents to call with weaker holdings, or I like, you know, especially when there's money in the pot. I don't mind, you know, running it if I feel like I'm ahead equity wise. But I guess just as particularly as an MTT player, I guess it just gives you more opportunities for things to not go your way, right? Like
Yeah.
if you could choose between taking 10 60-40s and taking 4 60-40s, even though the odds of having a big stack are much bigger if you take the 10 60-40s, your odds of busting are much greater as well.
Yeah.
Struggle sometimes with picking the right spot where you're pretty sure you're ahead. Go with it and not go with it. Similar to what you're saying, I think, Jim, is that
Mhm.
I love those ace queens when I know that they have a much worse range.
Right.
But sometimes it's not enough to love it to want to play it. I don't know.
Yeah.
In the ICM spot, it's just the opposite. It's so counterintuitive. The one that has an overly tight range is the one that you get aggressive against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing I'm seeing is I keep doing different spots in a Hold'em resource calculator, HRC, is if their calling range is 5% tighter than it should be, 3-2 offsuit is quite profitable to jam with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
basically
And-
any two cards.
Any two
Yeah.
cards. Yeah. I mean, and it's really not, I mean, it's less profitable than pocket aces, but it's surprising how narrow the gap is between those two hands in that
Mhm.
spot.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's really villain dependent, right? Like it really
Yeah.
is. They did an episode recently on the Thinking Poker podcast with Matt Glassman talking about 3-betting and 4-betting in the PSPC. And it was an interesting conversation because he had King 10 suited on the button, and he had opened and he got 3-bet from the blinds. And he was talking about how against certain players, King 10 suited is the kind of hand that you want to call 3-bets when you're deep enough, because you're getting good implied odds. You know, their hand strength is face up, and if you 4-bet, you're only ever getting called by better, and they don't have enough worse hands to fold to make it a profitable shove. But that against like more skilled, experienced players, King 10 suited becomes a shove because they just are going to fold a lot more often. And they're talking about it, and he even says, like, they're still going to have aces sometimes. They're still going to have kings sometimes, you know, still going to have ace king and king queen and whatever else that they continue with. But they were talking about it like when you're learning poker, getting kings in against aces is considered a cooler, and there's just like nothing you can do about it. But the more you play against thinking aggressive players, getting like king 10 in against pocket fours is a cooler. In the same way, it's like, well, he had pocket fours, I had king 10, so of course it all went in pre-flop. What are you gonna do? You know?
Mhm.
Did-
Like,
Since you brought up the kings and aces, I have to say it. There was just today or yesterday, Doug post, posted a hand where he had kings and Andrew Neeme had aces and
Oh, yeah.
somebody else had queens, and he actually folded the kings pre. Because it was like,
oh, I saw that. Yeah, it was someone had aces, someone had kings, someone had queens, and there was some like cold 4-betting pre-flop or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did. Which just goes to show it's possible to
You know,
fold kings pre.
it's funny in the poker brain, there, the way Matt constructed the ranges, based on GTO, there is no place where he 4-bets aces pre-flop.
Mm.
He's always calling. So if he opens with aces, somebody 3-bets, he just calls.
Does he have
no
any
place.
4-bets? Are there any 4-bets?
No, there's no 4-bets.
Because that's like from the game plan, right? Where
Right.
just to keep the ranges simple and more and easier to play, he just doesn't even have any of it. So
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. He doesn't there. If you look at all the ranges, he's very seldom 4-betting at all. The reason is because it's so hard to balance a 4-betting range.
Right.
Because what does it consist of? What are the hands in your 4-betting range? Now back, 10 years ago when everybody was doing this leveling war,
Yeah, clicking
you
it
could
back.
you could have a king 4 offsuit 5-bet. I mean, it was just like, it doesn't matter. It was just everybody was playing against everybody's weird ranges. Whereas now with the advent of GTO and people understanding ranges better, there really is no way of balancing a 4-bet range. So if you're only 4-betting aces and kings, it's pretty easy for your opponent to play against you.
Yep.
I think the aces was the 5-bet in that hand or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you're
that's
right. You're
cash.
right. It was.
And that's cash,
Yeah,
and that's probably going to be a lot different.
Yeah.
Cash is going to be a lot different because you want to get the money in pre-flop with that hand.
deeper stacks, so
Yep.
your pot geometry is much more important in cash games, particularly in
cash.
these stream games where it's like deep staked cash or deep stack cash too. You really need to inflate the pot early with those premiums.
Right.
But I really like that point, Rob, because this is something going back to Thinking Poker, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, Nate Mavis talked about, and I think everyone should think about poker this way. You don't start by looking at your hand. Start by looking at the spot that you're in, construct the ranges that you'd want to play profitably in that spot and the sizes that you'd want to use, and then look down and see if the cards that you're holding fit into those ranges. And if they do, great. You already know the size that you want to use and the action that you want to take. And one of the ways that he expressed that was looking down and saying, well, do I even want to have a limping range here? Do I even want to have a 4-betting range here? And if you don't, then don't even worry about it, and if you have a range that's so narrow that it's only aces and ace 5 suited, that's like the only way to keep it balanced, then what's the point in even having it? Which is kind of what you're getting at there, Rob, I think too. So because I think about 4-betting a lot, because it's very villain dependent, and there's a lot of really strong hands that are really bad 4-bets against a lot of players because you're turning like pocket jacks into a bluff essentially, because like no one's folding queens or better and no one's calling with 9s. So like jacks or 10s or like ace jack suited, ace queen feel like bad 4-bets and they should be played differently. So I mean those are pretty high up in the ranking of hands. So then like value 4-bets really have to be aces, kings. I mean, is ace king a value 4-bet? It's not really a value 4-bet.
Kind of a semi bluff.
Yeah, it's pretty strong though against any pair under kings,
Mhm.
right? You're still flipping
Yep.
against queens down, deuces through queens, you're still a 50-50
So I guess
to win that
is
hand.
is
So
that your preferred outcome? Like, so let's say someone three bets you and they're a tight player. Oh, I guess if they're a tight player, they don't have like twos through sixes in their three betting range. Probably not.
no.
So think
But
about that player then. Yeah, Rob.
I'm not four betting anybody. I'm not four betting with any two cards.
Yeah,
If I two bet with my ace king and somebody three bets me, unless it's a situation where you're really low, small stacked and it's a all in
right,
type,
right.
jam. I mean, there's
Yeah.
places where you're going to jam those hands, but in a relatively deep, 40 to 100 big blinds, there's really no four bets. In You have no hands in that four bet range at all. So that four bet range doesn't even exist.
So I get that, and I think that makes total sense. Now, take a little walk with me, a little hypothetical walk with me. Let's say we're playing in a game where a player to our left is three betting us a ton. We're opening our normal ranges, and we're just getting three bet a ton. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to start constricting our opening range a bit because we need to have fewer hands that we know we're going to fold to the three bet. And then experts would say another thing we should do is expand our four betting range to make them regret three betting us more often. Because just calling their three bets really doesn't punish them. Calling their three bets and now playing out of position in a bloated pot where they have an uncapped range and your range is capped, that's like just creating a more profitable situation for them post flop. So this will be the last thing we'll talk about today, I guess. How do we add what are the hands that we should be adding to our four bet range, or creating a four bet range in your case, Rob, in this kind of spot that we're talking about? I think we're definitely going to be doing it with the top of our range, right? Like we're going to include aces in it. Once we have a four betting range, we're going to include aces in it, and maybe
Yes.
kings would be an easy second hand to that. And against the player that we're talking about, when they're three betting a lot, I'm not sure how much it matters whether it's a linear three betting range or a polarized three betting range, because in either case, it's going to have hands that he's going to three bet fold.
I'm not going to have this situationally correct, but I listened to somebody a while ago talk about keeping aces out of that range and making it the kings and the
Yep.
queens and the maybe ace king.
Mm-hmm.
Not and I'm not sure I completely can explain the concept, but it stuck with me a little bit. So
Yeah, you do see that a lot in the solves, the GTO solves, that aces become calls, and the four bets are hands like kings and queens and ace king. Those types of hands turn out to be four bets, whereas aces turn out to be calls. And why is that? I don't know. I think it's because you're blocking so much of the hands that could call you with the pocket aces.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're blocking all the aces, ace kings, ace queens, the hands that you want to call you. Whereas if you four bet with kings and get five bet, you can say, okay, well, he's got the one hand that I didn't want to see.
Yeah.
But again, I think we're talking here about exploit rather than, we're not playing a GTO player if he's over
Right.
three betting.
Right.
If he's three betting us too much, he's not a GTO player.
Right.
So what
right.
we're playing, we're trying to exploit something. So what I was talking about before was the early part where we were talking about optimal poker.
Right.
Optimal poker says you don't four bet at all. The GTOs just don't have you four betting. It has you calling with this type of range. So now we're talking about exploiting somebody. So what is that range going to be? I think you need to do it with a polarized range and not a condensed range.
Yep.
I think you want to have some of the big hands in there, and you also want to have some bluffs in there, like your ace five suited type hands, and maybe a couple of suited Broadway and an unsuited Broadway type hand. Just a couple of little hands in there that you're gonna predetermine that these are the hands that you're going to use in that range.
Mhm.
Those are hands that you can easily fold to a 5-bet,
Yeah.
right? And then you're going to have a lot of other hands that you're going to just call the 3-bet with. A lot of your suited Broadways, a lot of your big cards, you're going to do that with because those hands are going to be ahead of his overall range.
Yeah. And I could see calling with like pocket pairs, hands that can improve to the nuts. Probably going to sneak some of those suited aces into the 4-betting range, because part of the problem is there's just no, once you stop 4-betting for value, it's like there aren't any good hands left to 4-bet with. So it's like all the hands that you're choosing are going to be bad hands. So it's like, what are the qualities that make them better than the rest? And it'll be things like blockers, the ability to make strong hands post flop when called. I think that's why like hands like the suited aces are better than like suited connectors or suited gappers that can still cover a lot of boards and they can make a lot of strong hands, but they're not blocking our opponent's range as often, and they can make like the second highest flush, or like, you know, they can make a low flush, which is kind of a nightmare in some of these 3 or 4-bet pot situations where our opponents mostly just have higher ranking cards.
You know, one
So-
thing I do
Yeah, please.
sometimes, if there's somebody who's 3-betting a lot, I mean, way too much, I'll even add the king 6 and king 7 suited,
Mhm.
because if he 5-bets me or calls, I'm going to be out of the hand. But if I flop something massive, he's not going to see that coming.
Right.
And I'm going to stack him. And it's so easy to fold that when it doesn't hit.
That
against
is
the
a nice
range.
quality.
Yeah.
Like, it's nice having hands that you're not worried about getting blown off your equity. Like, I'm more likely to call with a hand like king queen suited than 4-bet it.
Yep.
I'd rather see a flop with a hand like that. I'd much rather 4-bet completely as a bluff. Again, because that's like I think of like king jack offsuit as being a better 4-bet candidate there, because it's got similar blocking qualities, but I don't
Yep.
want to take it post flop as much, and like comfortably being able to fold when they continue the aggression is a good element of that.
Can I, Jim, sorry, before you wrap up, one other point that Ryan raised in the, or Ryan talked about in the video was this idea that a lot of people leave a couple of chips behind instead of going all in.
Yeah.
I didn't really get if there's any reaction to that, like, am I supposed to care? Am I supposed to push them all in to make them not do what they're trying to do, or do it? Like, is there any reason to react to that in any different way or not?
I'd love for anyone to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but from my understanding, the theory is to instead of going all in, to put 90% of your chips in, because if for whatever reason, like, I guess it depends. If it's pre-flop, the idea is that like if 6 other people all shove, you can still fold and ladder up 4 or 5 spots or something like that.
Right.
Post flop, I think it's more that if you're wrong and they don't reshove, but you still lose all but the remaining portion of your stack, you still have a seat in the tournament, even though you're not likely to do much with it. And having a small stack is more valuable than having no stack at all. So that's the theory, as I understand it, for why to do it.
So as a new person on the table, do I want to react to it then at all?
I think you want to make them go all in. Like if they want to hold some back, like, the thing about it that's interesting is that it's usually a pretty trivial number of chips compared to the pot at that size, right? So like compared to
If
the
I have
pot,
a lot of chips, I just don't want to let them do that.
right?
Am I wrong in that thinking? I guess is what I don't
I
know.
mean, I don't think people are doing it. Do you think people are doing it in a balanced fashion? Like, do you think people are doing it when they have the nuts? Like, do you think people are holding back when they have aces, or are they only holding back when they've got ace jack? Because if they're only holding back when they've got sub premium hands, then I think you must drop the hammer on them. You simply must.
I mean, that was my general thought, but I guess
Do you guys
maybe
do it?
the-
Does anyone here do it?
maybe
Do
it's
you hold
different
back?
maybe it's
No.
different pre-flop versus post-flop, but
I think
the-
it is.
Yeah, there's also an element there where, and I don't understand it. It has to do with the rules even, and I think this must be post flop. But if you hold back a little bit, and there's actually a third person in the hand, if they want to get the rest of those chips that you held back, they have to make a raise by the full amount of your shove. And if there's a third person in the hand, they can't do that.
Mhm.
So it's
Well, maybe that's-
basically a way you're kind of, the way it works is you're kind of stealing fold equity, but I'm not exactly sure how that works.
Yeah, or how that would be applied. Like
Yeah.
under what circumstances you'd want to do that. Like with jacks pre-flop.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring it up because I know people do it a lot now, and I just don't know if there's a right or wrong way to react to it, or if there's just no reaction to it.
I think it matters a lot if they will ever fold. Like that's the real key question here. If they've put 90% of their chips in and they've got 10% back, are they folding? Like, do they ever fold if you shove back on them? Like if they functionally never fold, then that's one thing. If they ever do fold, then I think it's a completely different question. Like, it really, you have to ask the person doing it, like, what their intentions are,
Right.
because it's a completely different question. Like, is it something that they're doing because they're weak enough, that they feel weak enough that they have a folding portion of their range at that point? Because if so, I mean, you must make them fold, right? You must. So the only other thing that I can think of, and this happens mostly in live play that we're talking about, but online, one reason to do it might be that HUDs pick up certain stats based on the action that you've taken. The way that my HUD processes hands through Poker Tracker 4, it has a certain note that it takes for players that shove all in, and then it has a different note that it takes for players that just raise X number of big blinds or something like that. So you, by not shoving all in, you're kind of changing the way that HUDs take notes on your hands. Even if you just keep one chip back, the HUD's never going to be able to say to its user, oh, they shoved all in with this hand, this hand, this hand, this hand, because you didn't shove all in. So it kind of protects that information from being processed by the HUD in that way. Even if you get it all in on a raise, it might introduce a level of like a veil for HUD users. That's the only other thing I can think of for online users, that it kind of confuses the stats. But I'd love to know what the consensus is in the poker world for what to do in these spots. I guess if you're going to fold anyway, it doesn't matter if they bet 90% of their stack or 100% of their stack. If you're folding anyway, it doesn't matter.
No, yeah.
So the
I
only
just
question
want-
is,
I got a really good hand, or I got a pretty good hand, or like I'm gonna call, or he's not making me fold. So do I want
Right.
to put those extra couple of chips in?
I think so.
Usually it's yes to me.
I think so. Like I guess you can, if you feel like you're
He's trying to
really
be
on the
cute.
fence.
I don't want him to be cute. I guess unless I want the bubble to continue because I have
Oh, that's a good
a
point.
lot of chips maybe.
Yeah, if you're like the chip leader at the table and you're pushing the table around as the bubbles getting close, then you might not want to bust them. That's a good point.
Anyway.
Yep.
Thanks.
And I guess the only other sense would be like you can cap your losses if you're that elastic to sizing. If you're like, I'd rather lose 90 chips than 100 chips on this hand, so I'm just going to call. but I think the chance to take out a player for that extra 10%, I just feel like I'm always, if I'm continuing with the hand, it's always going to be as a raise against that. What about you guys? Last thought for the day. If someone bets 90% of their stack and you're continuing, are you ever doing it as a call, or are you always raising?
If there's a third person in the hand,
No,
and
no,
he has
just heads up. Just
heads
heads up.
up, probably raising.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Rob, you're nodding. Same thing.
Yeah, I really don't have a clue why people do that, but
Yeah. It'll be an
yeah,
interesting
if
subject.
if it's a hand I want to get all in, I'm just going to put them all in.
If it ain't broke.
Yeah.
All right, guys, this is a really good conversation. So thanks to Ryan LaPlante and Learn Pro Poker for sharing that video with us every month. And Dave, Keith, and Rob, I thought we had a really good conversation about some of that stuff. So we'll see you all next month, if not before. And if you're watching from home, thanks for watching along. And head on over to rec.poker/resources. You can see all sorts of links to our other learning partners as well, and other learning tools and great ways to continue your own poker journey. All right, see you later.